Well, it is snowing in Washington, D.C., and, by the way, in Afghanistan. An odd coincidence. They're having massive problems there with avalanches that are killing people. And isn't using the D.C. snowstorms to try to debunk global warming the real Snowmageddon? William Yateman is with us. He's with the Competitive Enterprise Institute. His title is Energy Policy Analyst, CEI.org, the website. And William, welcome to the show. William?
Yes, sir.
You're welcome to our program.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry, I just blanked out, or it appears. My phone did for a couple seconds, so I might have missed the intro. I do.
Well, okay. Been out there shoveling that global warming this morning?
No, well, I certainly was shoveling some snow, however.
Here's the this just from National Geographic. I mean, they don't have a dog in the fight, and they do a pretty good job of just summarizing things. Average temperatures have climbed 1.4 degrees Fahrenheit since 1880. The rate of warming is increasing. The 20th century's last 2 decades were the hottest in 400 years. 11 of the past 12 years are among the dozen warmest since 1850. The Arctic is feeling the effects the most. Average temperatures in Alaska, western Canada, and eastern Russia have been twice the global average in increase. Arctic ice is rapidly disappearing. We're going to see the first ice-free summer in the Arctic probably in 2040. Montana's Glacier National Park is now down to 27 glaciers. It had 150 in 1910 when it was called Glacier National Park. Coral reefs are bleaching at record rates. And an upsurge in extreme weather incidents around the world, wildfires, heat waves, tropical storms, the snow that you're experiencing in D.C. All of these are the things predicted by climate change models. How can Competitive Enterprise Institute and other organizations, particularly those funded by the fossil fuel industry or people associated with it, continue to put this thing out? I mean, we had Glenn Beck yesterday saying there are not enough knives for dishonored climate scientists to kill themselves if they all decide to commit hara-kiri. This is just so over the top. How can you guys keep on doing this?
Well, I certainly don't recommend hara-kiri. I mean, things aren't that alarming, to be sure. So I would repudiate such claims. But I'll tell you what. You listed off a number of phenomena. You said they were all predicted by the models, and I believe the intro to this segment was so-called deniers, I guess of which I'm in that camp, using the current snowstorms to try to debunk global warming.
Well, that's, you've got Senator James Inhofe, I believe it is, out there building an igloo out in front of his house and saying Al Gore's new home. And I mean, it's all over Fox News. Almost every hour somebody makes some joke about this. I was listening to right-wing talk radio yesterday driving home, and they were all about how, see, we told you these snowstorms prove there's no global warming. Well, in fact, when the atmosphere warms up and you get more water vapor in it, you get more snow during the winter in some places.
I guess that was the point. I mean, all that media stuff aside, I don't watch Fox News, so I'm not aware of all these quips and whatnot. It does seem to provide, on the surface, anecdotal evidence against so-called global warming. Mm-hmm. Of course, it's not. It's a weather phenomenon. And, I think the famous quote, weather is what happens this weekend, climate is what happens over the next 100 years. But remember, that cuts both ways. The models, in fact, don't predict more snow. Indeed, the IPCC, their models, according to their frequently asked questions 3.2 of the IPCC third assessment report, they say that indeed we will expect more precipitation, less snow. So this is somewhat antithetical to what the models would say.
Well, it's less snow worldwide, not less snow in Washington, D.C., and there may be less snow worldwide.
Perhaps. I honestly don't have the figures.
They also predict, and you have to acknowledge this, that there will be larger extremes in extreme weather events.
That is as I understand it, and again, I'm not a scientist, but I'm under the impression that's a very controversial link between a warming planet and the incidence of increased frequency.
Well, how could there not be? If you're adding energy to a system, to a turbulent system, the system is going to become less turbulent?
Well, I mean,
when you heat a pot of water, it starts to boil.
When you say how could it not be, I think that assumes a kind of a comprehension of the trillions of abiotic and biotic features that go into the phenomenon we refer to as the climate. I think that assumes an understanding that perhaps isn't there. And indeed, we do see this.
Well, I'm kind of going by Newton's 3 laws of thermodynamics. I mean, it's
I don't know if those are Newton's laws of thermodynamics, but that's neither here nor there. The point is
that's right. Newton was motion, wasn't it? I'm sorry.
Amongst other things.
Yeah.
But he was, so I don't think it's proper for example, we had Brian Walsh in Time magazine insinuating that this precipitation, this snowfall in Washington, D.C., is further evidence of global warming. And so just as one side, like you pointed out, I guess the Inhofe thing and the Fox News and whatnot, is trying to use this to debunk global warming incorrectly, I might add, we've got certain people, on the other side, I guess, trying to use it as evidence for global warming, and there's no real evidence for that either. This is a weather phenomenon, not a climate phenomenon. So that's what, it cuts both ways.
Well, and I don't disagree with you. But my point is that, well, okay, we'll leave it at that. That this is a weather phenomenon, and time will tell. But here we have all these scientists, all the scientists. The empirical evidence is that the planet is warming, and maybe you can help me out. I think that the people on my side of the argument have ceded to you guys or you're just better at it, the messaging. And Dmitry Orlov over at cluborlov.blogspot.com, he's got, let's change the messaging. Instead of calling it global climate change, this is scientific mumbo-jumbo, he says, you should call it your home, right? Franklin County, West Washington County. Instead of calling it warming, we should call it screwed up weather. Instead of saying increased precipitation, we should say, flood, your double wide's going to get washed into the ravine. Instead of average temperature increase, we should say, heat waves, you'll be running your AC flat out and still sweating like a pig. Instead of talking about atmospheric CO2 concentration, we should say, burning stuff is screwing up the weather. Everybody's got to stop burning stuff. And instead of talking about polar ice cap melt, we should say, you can't drive your SUV on the interstate because it's underwater. Help me with the messaging here.
Well, I guess I can't. I guess I can't speak on behalf of the entire movement. I'm one policy analyst. I do policy work with the Competitive Enterprise Institute.
Right.
I would suggest, in a lot of what I do in communicating global warming and energy policy through a free market lens, again, it's a libertarianist think tank I work for, is trying to ratchet down the volume. I mean, to have a level-headed conversation about the expected costs if indeed global warming is occurring. As against the expected benefits of spending literally trillions of dollars, scores of trillions of dollars, to re-engineer the global economy along a non-fossil fuel path. So I mean, I would just
why don't you throw into that equation then the increase, the $2.9 billion increase in our trade deficit last quarter that was purely the result of our importing oil from the Middle East.
Well, again, we engage in the international market for hydrocarbon fuels, for oil, because it's the cheapest alternative. I mean, really, we benefit, I guess, from international trade. These geopolitical concerns that, to a certain extent, are overhyped.
It benefits us to give money to Saudi Arabia so that they can give it to Osama bin Laden so he can do what he does?
Well,
what am I missing
there
here?
Actually there's no, I guess, empirical link. They do a lot of work over, Jerry Taylor does a lot of empirical work over at the Cato Institute about empirical links between the price of oil and instances of terrorism. And I guess empirically speaking, there is no such link.
Are you saying that if there was no oil in the Middle East, that if the Middle East had a resource base similar to, I don't know, one of the countries in the northern part of South Africa, where nobody's prospecting for anything, that we wouldn't have had terrorists coming out of there?
Ooh, who knows? I mean, remember, what is the causal factor creating terrorism? I don't necessarily know if it's oil wealth. I mean, there's antipathy towards.
You don't think Dick Cheney would have been coveting it?
I don't know anything.
Yeah.
Dick Cheney
Okay.
is not
William, we're out of time, but you made your point. William Yateman, CEI.org. Thanks for being here.